Good afternoon, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Numbers. Today we are in chapter 24. It's a continuation of the story about Balaam or Balaam, the so called prophet who God could speak to him, and he is known as one that when he speaks, whatever he says will come true, uh, and 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 thereby the Moabite king is trying to get him to place a curse on the Israelites, and so that in the ensuing war, the Moabite king Balak will supposedly win over the Israelites. But in this engagement, we have constantly seen that Balaam, or Balaam as we call him, uh, has heard God's voice, understood what God says, and repeated exactly what God wanted him to say. And so we have those words that God put words into his mouth, but it's not really put, but in a way where he had no choice but to really say what God wants him to say, because of who God is and because of his fear and being terrified of who God is. To repeat exactly what God says and not violate that. He somehow knows God in this sense, of being able to say things which is true. And so after two episodes of hearing God, and he was really hoping that God would curse Israel, but God didn't, he is now confounded. Verse 24, when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, the idea of it pleased the Lord means it was good in the eyes, right? In the eyes of the Lord. That is what it means by please. The idea here is in God's mind, it is good to bless Israel because Israel is his firstborn, because Israel is the chosen nation, because Israel is supposed to be the nation of priests, and a holy nation. And so there is no way at this point in time that God is going to allow any words of cursing that will be upon Israel. And so Balaam or Balaam, for two occasions now, had received words of blessings from God. Now, each time he asked Balak to set up seven altars with seven rams and seven bulls, we find that he would go off in a quiet place, hoping to find God. Now, in chapter 24, verse 1, tells us why Balaam did that. Verse 1 says he did not go as at other times to seek the use of sorcery. The word sorcery is omen. He wanted to look for signs, he wanted to look for just some things that he could actually use to satisfy Balak. And so he would go and hopefully by chance get in touch with something divine. And each time he did that, he received the words of God to bless. And so this time round, he didn't go to search for something special on his own. And that's the word sorcery. It's really not sorcery in the modern terms, but it's an omen. He wants to look for some supernatural event. And so this time round, he set his face toward the wilderness. Now, it was said that this word, the wilderness, it's a very specific wilderness, possibly towards the south where there was the episode of the golden calf. Now, I am saying that it's possible because by inference, we see that Balaam is now no longer looking for a sign of God. He is looking for something that is terrible about Israel so that he could get God to curse them. And so, and then Balaam lifted his eyes. And this word here is lifted his eyes. He raised his eyes and he actually saw Israel encamped according to their tribes. If you recall, in the early book of Numbers, God instructed them how they should camp with the tabernacle in the center. And each tribe or each set of tribes in a north, south, east, west formation. Now, while he was setting his mind to look for something bad about Israel, perhaps God will say something cursing about Israel, again, the Spirit of God came upon him. So understand that this word, the Spirit of God, would be the wind of God, right? The wind of God, in a particular presence of God, came upon him, that is Balaam. In verse 3, again, he says, he took up his oracle and said, now understand, this word oracle is actually, by translation, it is the proverb. It is not a direct statement, but it's in some poetic form, right? A poetic form of speech. Now, let us go through this. It says, the utterance of Balaam, right? The utterance of Balaam ben Beor, the son of Beor, and this is the utterance of the man whose eyes are open. Now let's just do a slight correction. This word here, whose eyes are open, may not be such a good word. It says here the utterance of the man, and this would mean a man of ability, the man of ability, and the man of ability who has the eye. I think this whole phrase can be translated as how should we say, who has the open eye. Now, I guess you find that in the Oriental aspect, this is how they would think. When you have an ability to connect to the supernatural, God, and it is said that he has an innate sense, and this would be the eye of the mind that is open to connect to the divine. And so this would be Balaam, who is speaking, the speech, and well, I guess the other word is also the declaration. Both actually means things that he is saying, right? And Balaam is the one who has what they would call an open eye, I guess you could say this, because he has the ability to prophesy. And this ability to prophesy is said to be one with an open eye, right? The eye is open inside of him, that he can actually see, well, maybe not in a face-to-face manner, in some veiled manner, and God showing him what to say. And then verse 4 continues this topic, the utterance, the declaration of him who hears. He actually hears God speaking to him, And by word, it is what is said, right? The speech of God. So he actually hears God's voice. And then he also says that he sees the vision of Shaddai, and this would be El Shaddai. By vision, it means that he has uh, a vision to see the divine, the supernatural. Maybe I use this word. So he has an eye to see the supernatural. And in this case, the supernatural is God. God, who speaks with him, shows him enough of himself that he knows that this is Shaddai, and he falls down, and this is the word, he falls down and literally cast down or lie down, who falls down and who lies down because of who he sees. And the final phrase is that his eyes wide open. The word here is not wide open. The word here means his eyes is uncovered. Uncovered means the veil over his eyes uh, allows him to peer into the supernatural. So all of these actually means the same thing. They've got the A, we've got a B, and we've got the C. And it's about his eyes seeing the supernatural. In verse 5, we now read, "How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel." Again, this is an A and a B. How lovely is a description. How good. So you find your tents and your dwellings to be the same. Tents literally means the tent that they put up. Dwelling means the place they live in. Jacob and Israel means the same thing. Jacob's other name is Israel. And in this case, they are referencing the patriarch as a reference. Verse 6, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens by the riverside, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the waters. All of this is about the view that Balaam has, that Balaam has. As he saw the camps of Israel. Remember, he was trying to head to the wilderness, and he turned and he saw how the what called the flatlands of Moab on the eastern shore of the Jordan, they are all lined up there. And just imagine that formation that God had, and he would be on the hill looking down. And this is what he is describing as that view of Israel along the plains of Moab on the eastern shore, all laid there like valleys that stretch out like gardens by the riverside, like the aloe plant. It's a kind of a tree with a kind of a perfume, like cedars, big trees, and they are like strength besides the water. He shall pour water from his buckets, his seed shall be in many waters. It is describing how fruitful they will be. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. Understand, Agag would be the king of the Amalekites. And later we will see, much later, right, in the book of First Samuel, his kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, his king, the king of Israel, shall be higher. The idea of being higher is more lofty. His kingdom shall be exalted, would be lifted up, caused to be lifted up. And so these are an A and a B to say that that Israel is greater than the Amalekites, right? It's greater than the Amalekites. And Amalekites are very powerful people within the lands of Canaan. Verse 8, God brings him out of Egypt. Who is him? Israel, right? Israel. He has strength like a wild ox, basically to describe the character of Israel. He shall consume the nations, his enemies. He shall break their bones and pierce them with his arrows, meaning they fight very well. He bows down and he lies as a lion. Who shall rouse him? And that he will be fearsome. And finally, it comes to a Genesis 12 type of verse. Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you. Verse 9. And so this is in Genesis. This one you find in Genesis chapter 12. And this is actually to Abraham. Genesis chapter 12, verse 2 and 3. And this is part of the Abrahamic covenant. And you can see with what God told Abraham, right? This is about Abraham. And it is applied to Israel, which means that the blessing to Abraham is with regards to the entire generations that follows in this context. And so we can be sure that as Genesis chapter 12 verses 2 and 3 is used on Israel, it is specifically for them and not for Esau. And we can see it as a fact. Although Esau was also one of those descendants, but this is very specifically used to apply to the chosen lineage. The chosen lineage of Abraham. Now, this is the third, right? This is the third of whatever he was, but God put into his mouth to show him what he should say, and he said it all. And of course, the effect was not desired. Balak's anger was aroused against Balaam. He says, why? He struck his hands together as a symbol of anger. And Balak said to Balaam, what did he say? He said, I called you to curse my enemies. And this would be Israel. And look, you have bountifully blessed them these 3 times. Now, therefore, flee to your place. What does it mean? Go home. That's our colloquial style. Go home. I said I would greatly honor you. The idea here, I would greatly honor you, in verse 11, is to give great importance to him. So that would be fame, that would be fortune. But in fact, the Lord has kept you back from the honor. The idea is kept you back. This word kept you back is to withhold. The Hebrew word would be to withhold or deny, right? To keep back, to refrain you, which means this: Balak not Balak, Balaam, wants fame and fortune. And Balak knows that Balaam wants fame and fortune. But Balaam has said that whatever the Lord says, he will do. And in what he says, had greatly upset and angered Balak. And so there would be no fame and fortune for Balaam. And so that's the meaning of this phrase, that the Lord has kept you back from honor. It is Jehovah who is not going to allow you to have fame and fortune. So verse 12, so Balaam said to Balak, did I not also speak to your messengers whom you sent to me, saying, if Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the word of the Lord to do good or bad of my own will. What does this mean, of my own will? It means that if God doesn't allow, then all he can do is only what God tells him to do. Now, whether it is good blessing or bad cursing, it's about the word of the Lord, nothing more. And so what the Lord says, that I must speak, and that is what he knows very well, as much as he knows fame and fortune. So now he has a suggestion, and now indeed I am going to my people. The idea here is going back to where he came from. Come, I will advise you what this people will do to your people in the latter days. What does that mean? So let us break this down just a little bit. I will advise you, give you counsel. Right? I'm going to tell you some secret. What this people, Israel, will do to your people would be the Moabites in the latter days. Now, the word latter days literally means the end days, but we need to look at the context. In a later time, not now, in a later time, and we have to look at the context as to how far down the road that is. It has to do with Moab, and so it will have to do with when Moab is around, and these things will happen. Verse 15 would be Balaam's fourth oracle, right? This is number 4. And as again opens up the utterance of Balaam, the son of Beor, and the utterance of the man whose eyes are open, the utterance of him who hears the words of God and has the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty, who falls down with eyes wide open. All of these is a declaration of whose words are being said. And so it is about Balaam, but it's about what is being said. And the ones that's being said, the things that's being said is from verse 17 onwards, right? And the description of who Balaam is the son of Beor. Balaam, his eyes are open. He's got an open inner eye, not eyes, but eye, right? Then it says, Balaam is the one who hears the speech of God. Balaam has the knowledge of Elion, right? This is Elion. We read this in Genesis chapter 14, when we talked about the God Most High, El Elyon. And so this word is Elyon. He has the knowledge of Elyon. Then he sees the vision of Shaddai. and he falls down and his eyes are uncovered, right? Uncovered. And it shows that he has the credentials, he's seeing it from God, and is about God, Elohim. Verse 16, El, and this is Elyon, and this is Shaddai. Three names of God. And he is the one whose eyes are open and his eyes are uncovered, and he can hear and see what God has described to him. Now he is going to tell a prophecy because it's about the end, right? The end days. And again, end days is not about far future, but future of Moab. Verse 17 onwards, we will pay attention. And this is what he says. I see him, but not now. Not the present. Not the present. This is the word now. I behold him, but not near. Now, the word near would be near in terms of time, I would say, right? This is both about seeing. It's about the how far future. So what you can say now is not now. It is not near in terms of time. And he's saying that there will be a star coming out of Israel, a scepter rising out of Jacob. This is another A and B. This is an A and B. So you can see all sets of A and B. Jacob, Israel. Come out, rise up. So first word is a star. A star is a primary, well, I guess you could say a primary character. A rod, a scepter, a ruler, right? Shall rise out of Israel. And this would be a future reference of a king. And of course, this eventually we would see it to be David. And then it says it to batter the brow of Moab, to destroy all the sons of tumult. And this is what it says. To batter means to break, to shatter the brow of Moab, and then to, well, this word here would mean to destroy, right? All the sons of defiance, I would say. Defiance. I think this would be that word. Yeah. The sons of defiance. Which means that Moab is considered that. And so this is another A and a B. And it is about destruction. All these is speaking about a future time. Verse 18. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir also his enemies shall be a possession, while Israel does valiantly. The word valiantly is to perform with strength. This is a comparison. Edom is Seir. So this is an A and a B. They will not own their place. But Israel continues to perform with strength. Out of Jacob, one shall have dominion and destroy the remains of the city. This is verse 19. And you find that verse 19 talks about the future. right? The future. This is a ruler from Jacob, and this would be the city, of and it wouldn't be the city, it would be of a town, right? And the city here would be in the, well, I guess you could say that city of Edom, and out of Jacob one shall have dominion. This word shall have dominion is to rule, to dominate, and it would destroy the remains of the city of Edom. And this appears to be a far future event, maybe messianic, Then he looked on Amalek, and he took up his oracle and said, Amalek was first. Amalek was the beginning, right? Not just first. Was chief among the nations. I think that would be a better way of saying it. Because it says here, they are the Rashid people, they are the chief. They are the head, right? The head among the nations, the Goyim. But shall be last until he perishes. So he's saying that from the first or the beginning, he would become the last part, right? The last part, the end part. So he's no longer among the first until he is perished. This is the word destroy. So these are future discourse about Amalek, that they will also be destroyed. Edom would be destroyed, as Moab would be destroyed. And then he looks on the Canaanites. And then he took up his oracle and said, firm is your dwelling place, and your rest is set in the rock. The Canaanites are a very stable, established people. And that this is to say that they are very firm in, and Cain shall be burned as long as Asher carries you away captive. How long will Asher carries you away captive? Now, this idea of the Canaanite, likely to be one of those companions that they were supposed to destroy, actually. The Canaanites would be one of those that God has specifically said that they will not be around. And so this would be one of those prophecies that also says that they will be destroyed, exiled, and all this by the Assyrians. Now, at this point in time, none of these people like the Assyrians are great people yet. It will be many years down the road that the Assyrians will ever come up and perform this verse 22. Verse 23, he took up his oracle and said, alas, the Hittites, the coast of Cyprus is probably a modern way of looking at the Hittites, but the Hittites probably came from around that area. And these will be talking about Ashur, the Assyrians, and afflict Ever. Ever would be the Hebrew. And it is interesting to see that there will be, this is a prophecy. that there will be a group of people that will come way up north and west, and all of these who are powerful will also be, well, I guess you could say that they will also uh, be put aside. Now, how should we say it? This word is where we get the word Hebrew, and there is a one of the grandchildren of Noah, and this would be where the origins of Abraham would be. Now, that land that they occupied in Ur and in Haran, that is also understood as an area called Babylon. And so, in that sense, you can think of it this way, that the Assyrians, we talk about the Assyrians and the Babylonians, would also be replaced by people up in the coast of Cyprus called the Hittites. And it's pointing to that area. Now, what we have seen is, if you had a chance of studying a book of Daniel, you would find that the Syrians came, and then the Babylonians came, and after that there was the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, of the head of gold, the chest of silver, the chest of arms of silver, the belly of bronze, the thighs of iron, and the legs and the feet and feet of iron mixed with clay. That kind of an imagery that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed of is probably indicative of this prophecy here, that one day all these things are going to happen, and it is far, far beyond their imagination. One of the things that you find is that there will be a lot of things that's going to happen from here on, at this time where Balaam was speaking, to the point where the Moabites will be destroyed, and then later on the Amalekites are destroyed, and then later on there will be an even greater empire that will come and afflict the Assyrians and the land where the Hebrew came from, the Babylon area. Now, understand this, that the Babylonians are the ones that will come after the Assyrians. And so you find that in this particular oracle of Balaam would be his last, his fourth, and his final. And God told him to speak it. And he says, that's the final one that I'm going to advise you what's going to happen. You cannot undo what God has set out to do. So Balaam rose, departed, and returned to his place. And Balak also went his way. And in this case, everything was over. Numbers chapter 24, in particularly the fourth prophecy of Balaam, is of particular interest to many of us when you spend time looking at what God is predicting and telling. And it's an incredible prophecy. And even Balaam says, who is going to stand when God is establishing, is going to make this happen? And when that happens, it's going to be a terrible day. And that's the prophecy that's being said now. Why would that happen? Well, we know that there will be nations that will rise up greater than Moab. But we also know that as they are building up their force, the history of Israel will continue to perpetuate. And in so doing, when they turn bad, God used these nations at the right time to inflict judgment upon Israel. And hereby we see that God is a God who can see how nations are doing, even now that they are growing to become big and strong nations one day. These are characteristics that none of us can see, but it is God who has placed the nations together, and each of them are beginning to come together to play their part. And as they play their part, God will then look upon Israel and whether they are obedient or disobedient. And then God will engage these contemporary nations to bring about his judgment upon Israel. And that is the reason why we see these prophecies being given, so that as they come about, whatever happens at that point in time to Israel as a nation, God will know how to deal with them. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.